It started as a normal day at the outer edges of the Empire. Officers moved along the corridors of the massive space station, attending their usual duties, checking reports, and observing the quiet darkness of space beyond the reinforced windows. The stars were familiar to them, patterns they had memorized long ago, systems they had mapped with precision. Everything seemed ordinary, just another day in a galaxy that had grown used to stability and routine. Yet, far beyond the outermost patrol routes, something unusual appeared. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint signal that flickered on the scanners. Most of the junior officers ignored it, thinking it was a glitch or a minor fluctuation caused by cosmic radiation. But as the minutes passed, the signal grew stronger. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It was steady, calm, and surprisingly organized. The chief technician furrowed his brow, leaning closer to the monitor. "Commander, you might want to see this," he said. His voice carried a hint of unease, which was unusual for someone who spent most of his days handling anomalies. The commander strode over, his long coat swishing behind him. He studied the data, his eyes narrowing. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The trajectory. It's deliberate. Someone is approaching, and they're moving in formation." Word spread quickly through the station. Messages pinged across the communication network, each carrying the same uncertain tone. Unknown fleet approaching. At the edge of Imperial space. Seems organized. For a galaxy that had faced countless visitors, traders, explorers, and even pirates, the reaction was surprising. There was no panic, not yet. But there was tension, a quiet, electric kind of tension that made every officer sit a little straighter, check their weapons a little more carefully, and glance at the stars as if they might suddenly reveal the future. Hours passed, and then the shapes became visible on the scanners. They were massive, elegant, and unlike anything the Empire had ever catalogued. Their hulls glowed faintly, almost like they were lit from within, but not with aggression. The ships didn't rush forward or try to break through the outer defenses. They moved slowly, deliberately, in a formation that was precise, almost ritualistic. The Empire had rules for handling unknown fleets. Normally, patrols would be sent, probes launched, warnings transmitted, all steps designed to assert dominance and ensure safety. But when the orders were given to approach these ships, the patrols hesitated. There was something different about them, something that didn't belong in the usual chaos of space encounters. Even the newest cadets, who had never faced a situation like this before, felt it in their bones. These ships were not just travelers. They carried intent, purpose, and perhaps intelligence far beyond what anyone had imagined. In the control room, officers whispered among themselves. "Who are they?" Someone asked. Another replied, "They are not in our records." Not a single file mentions a species with this level of coordination and technology. The commander remained silent, studying the screen. He had dealt with surprises before, but this was not ordinary. The sheer calmness of the fleet was unsettling. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't submissive either. It simply existed, waiting. As the fleet hovered at the edge of Imperial space, another layer of uncertainty settled over the station. Messages were sent to the Council, who were just as perplexed. Advisors argued over interpretations of the data. Analysts proposed theories, and scientists examined every anomaly. One suggested it could be an advanced diplomatic mission. Another warned it might be a prelude to war. But none could explain the strange, silent confidence of these newcomers. Then, after hours of silence, the first communication arrived. It was simple, almost understated. A single line, transmitted through the most secure channels. It read, "We come from Earth. We request peaceful contact." The room fell silent. Earth. That name did not exist in any Imperial records. It sounded familiar, almost like a legend or a myth. Officers exchanged confused glances. Was this some trick? A false transmission meant to lure them into a trap? Yet the calm tone of the message, its clarity and directness, made it feel honest. The Empire's leadership, usually confident and decisive, froze. They were used to commanding fleets, negotiating treaties, and defending their borders. They were not used to being confronted with the unknown in a way that demanded respect rather than fear. This was a species that arrived not with blasters ready or weapons drawn, but with an invitation to dialogue, a simple request to be heard. Across the Empire, debates erupted. Some argued that this was a test of strength. Perhaps the humans had weapons hidden beyond detection, technology so advanced that the Empire could not perceive it yet. Others countered that there was a subtle genius in their approach. To send a fleet of that size, perfectly coordinated, yet silent and non-threatening, it required confidence, discipline, and perhaps something deeper, a kind of moral courage the Empire rarely encountered. Back on the station, the junior officers stared at the main viewports. The human ships moved with quiet grace. Their lights shimmered against the black canvas of space. They did not change formation, did not display aggression. It was almost as if they were teaching a lesson in patience, in restraint. For the first time in a long time, the Empire realized that not all power needed to be loud or forceful. Some power could be shown through control, through careful demonstration, and through the ability to arrive fully prepared without frightening others unnecessarily. The weeks that followed were filled with observation. Scientists examined every detail of the fleet's construction. Strategists debated the implications. Diplomats prepared messages, unsure whether to approach formally or wait for a further signal. And throughout all of this, the humans continued to hover at the edge of imperial space, silent, patient, waiting. The citizens of the Empire began to notice the change too. Screens in public squares, stations, and even residential hubs displayed the mysterious fleet. There was awe in the way people spoke about them. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of wonder rarely experienced in the routine of daily life. Have you seen them? People would ask one another, do you think they are dangerous? And the answer often came back uncertain, tinged with admiration. I don't know, but there's something about them. Something human. Even among the most hardened military commanders, there was a strange respect growing. They had faced enemies who shouted, who demanded, who attacked without mercy. They had faced rivals who used intimidation and fear as their primary tools. But these newcomers, these humans, approached differently. They did not need to show force because their presence alone commanded attention. They did not need to shout to be heard because their silence said something louder than any weapon could. And then, in a quiet corner of the station, a young cadet whispered to a friend, almost to herself, maybe this is how humans always act. They don't rush. They don't push. They wait, and somehow, they make you notice them, just by being there. Her friend nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing shapes beyond the viewport. It's strange, he said, but I feel like we are learning from them already. As the first part of this story came to a close, the Empire remained frozen, not out of fear, but out of realization. A new chapter in the galaxy was beginning, one that no one had anticipated. And it all started with a calm fleet at the edge of space. A simple message from a place called Earth, and the quiet power of patience, discipline, and presence. The humans had arrived, not as conquerors, not as aggressors, but as something new, something different. And the Empire, with all its history and all its experience, had no choice but to stop and truly observe. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in centuries, it was unsure of what would come next. The Empire had rules for almost everything, especially for unknown visitors arriving at their borders. Normally, a fleet appearing without prior notice would trigger alarms, a chain of commands, and a show of power. Yet these humans did not follow any expected patterns. They hovered in formation, neither advancing aggressively nor retreating. Their presence alone was enough to unsettle seasoned officers. Inside the control room of the main space station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers shuffled reports, tapped on consoles, and spoke in low voices. Every now and then, a junior officer would glance at the glowing shapes of the human fleet, trying to imagine their size and strength. The ships were sleek, unfamiliar, and perfectly aligned. Each movement, each adjustment, was deliberate. Nothing about them suggested panic, chaos, or desperation. A senior officer, one who had served in the Empire for decades, finally broke the silence. "We've dealt with threats before," he said. "We've seen fleets bigger than this. We've faced enemies stronger than we are. But never has a fleet arrived like this, without a single act of aggression." His voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of disbelief. A younger officer, nervous and curious, spoke up. "Sir, should we consider them dangerous? Maybe they are hiding weapons or traps. They might be testing us." The older officer shook his head slowly. "We've trained for threats, yes, but this is something different. Danger isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in quiet strength. Observe them, learn from them, and most importantly, do not underestimate them." The human ships remained stationary, like statues in the vast blackness of space. Hours turned into days. Imperial analysts tried to read the intentions of the newcomers. They studied the formation patterns, the energy emissions, the faint signals that occasionally flickered through the scanners. Every piece of data was puzzling. Humans had technology that was advanced in ways the Empire had not expected, yet their actions were deliberate and restrained. A diplomat on the station, assigned to study first contact scenarios, gathered a small team in a quiet conference room. "We need to understand them before we make any moves," she said. "We can't treat them like a hostile force, but we also can't ignore the possibility that they are planning something we don't understand." The team pored over all available information. They analyzed fleet formations, energy usage, communication signals, and even the way the ships maneuvered with respect to each other. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Humans were patient. They anticipated possible scenarios and adapted to them quietly. They were not impulsive, not reckless, and not aggressive. Everything was measured, and every move seemed calculated to maintain peace while showing readiness. Word of the humans. Behavior reached the higher ranks of the Empire. Council members debated what this meant. Some argued that the humans were subtly powerful, capable of devastating action if provoked. Others believed their restraint and patience revealed a species that was morally confident, disciplined, and intelligent. Even those who had fought in wars across multiple systems admitted they had never seen an approach like this. Meanwhile, the citizens of the Empire were watching too. Screens in the streets, schools, and public hubs displayed the distant fleet. People stopped to stare, whispered to each other, and speculated about the newcomers. Children asked their teachers, "Who are they? Where did they come from?" And parents, often unsure themselves, simply replied, "They are from a world called Earth. We don't know much yet, but we are learning." Back on the station, officers began to notice subtle changes in themselves. Conversations that had once been routine now carried questions about humanity, curiosity, and strategy. Young cadets found themselves wondering what it would be like to meet these humans face to face. Experienced commanders considered how they would approach negotiations if the humans decided to speak. The presence of the fleet was changing more than the political landscape. It was changing the minds and hearts of those who observed them. As the days passed, one incident drew particular attention. A small patrol ship had been sent near the edge of the human fleet to collect more data. The patrol ship approached slowly, signaling its identity, following all the Empire's protocols. The humans did not move aggressively or block their path. Instead, one of the human ships adjusted slightly, creating a corridor of safe passage. The crew of the patrol ship reported back in awe. They didn't fire. They didn't threaten. They guided us through, calmly, without saying a word. The Empire's analysts were stunned. In every previous encounter, unknown fleets reacted with either avoidance, aggression, or deception. Humans had done none of these. Instead, they displayed a combination of confidence and courtesy. The implications were profound. If this species could control their strength, plan meticulously, and yet remain calm under scrutiny, the Empire was facing a civilization that could outthink many others without needing conflict. Inside the station, a strategy meeting was called. Leaders discussed how to respond. "We cannot act like we do with pirates or traitors," said one official. "We need to treat this as a diplomatic opportunity. We need to learn from them, not challenge them." Another leader argued the opposite. "We cannot take chances. Their fleet is large. We must be ready for the worst." The room fell silent. Neither approach seemed perfect. Both carried risk as the meeting continued. A young officer raised a quiet but important point. Perhaps that is the lesson. Perhaps their strength is not in what they can destroy, but in what they choose not to destroy. Their fleet is proof that power can be restrained, and that restraint can be its own kind of force. The words hung in the air. Slowly, the room began to nod in agreement. Outside the station, the human fleet continued its quiet vigil. Energy. Readings were steady, movement precise, and signals consistent. They did not advance, but they did not retreat. They were patient, waiting for the Empire to decide how to respond. And in that waiting, they sent a message that no words could fully capture. Strength is shown not by attacking, but by holding back. Discipline is shown not by demanding respect, but by earning it. The citizens of the Empire, who had never considered the idea that patience could be a weapon, started to see it differently. News reports, broadcasts, and private discussions all focused on the mystery of the humans. Commentators debated their intentions. Artists created images of the sleek ships, and storytellers began imagining what it would be like to meet such a species. Across thousands of worlds, the human fleet became a symbol not of fear, but of possibility. On the station, a young cadet stared at the view screen for hours, silently noting how each ship in the fleet maintained its position, how each light glimmered softly against the darkness. The cadet whispered to a friend, "It's strange. They could destroy us if they wanted, but they don't. They are waiting, but it's not threatening. It's patient." The friend nodded, wide-eyed, realizing that in their calm observation, the humans were teaching a lesson. Meanwhile, in the council chambers, leaders were forced to confront a truth they had long ignored. Power without restraint was dangerous, but restraint without weakness was powerful. These humans had arrived not to conquer or intimidate, but to show that presence, patience, and careful planning could shift the balance of power more than fleets of weapons ever could. By the end of Part 2, the Empire was beginning to change. Patrols were cautious but respectful. Diplomats were curious and careful. Citizens were aware that something unprecedented had entered their lives. And through it all, the humans continued to wait, silent yet commanding attention, a fleet at the edge of space that did not need to fire a single shot to prove its significance. The lesson of the humans was slowly sinking in. Strength is not always shown in force. Discipline is not always shown in command. And sometimes, the quiet presence of a patient and confident civilization can challenge everything a powerful empire thinks it knows. The Empire was frozen again, not out of fear, but out of realization. Observation had become more than strategy. It had become understanding. And as the human fleet remained in formation, the galaxy began to sense that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that would be remembered for generations. Days had turned into weeks, yet the human fleet remained calm at the edge of Imperial space. Their presence was impossible to ignore. Every officer, analyst, and diplomat on the stations near the border was aware of them. The fleet did not change formation, did not send aggressive signals, and yet their very existence demanded attention. The Empire had seen fleets arrive before, but always with a purpose that was clear: trade, colonization, or conquest. The humans were different. They brought a fleet that could easily be mistaken for a show of power, but their movements suggested something entirely unexpected. There was precision, yes, but also patience. They waited silently, as if asking for permission to be acknowledged, rather than demanding it. Inside the main control room, officers were on edge. Every new reading from the scanners was analyzed, every faint transmission carefully decoded. Yet no threat appeared. No warning came. Just the quiet hum of ships holding their positions. The commanders began to feel a mixture of awe and unease. How could a species so seemingly patient and disciplined carry such a fleet? What was their true goal? Finally, after weeks of silent observation, the first human communication came through the Empire's secure channels. It was simple and clear, unlike any previous message the Empire had received from a new species. The transmission read, "We come from Earth. We request peaceful contact." The words were short, but their impact was profound. Silence swept through the station as the message was read aloud. "Earth," a young officer whispered to a colleague. "Earth. It's just one word." The senior officers were stunned. For decades, they had cataloged thousands of worlds, studied countless species, and prepared for countless scenarios. Yet here was a species calling itself by a single word, with no fanfare, no threats, no demands, and no boast. The simplicity of it made the message feel calm, confident, and controlled. Council members and diplomats held emergency meetings to discuss the proper response. Opinions were divided. Some argued for caution, suggesting the humans might be advanced beyond current knowledge and capable of hidden aggression. Others argued for engagement, noting the respectful tone and patience as signs of intelligence and a willingness to cooperate. Amid all this debate, a young cadet, observing from the side, made a quiet but important point. Maybe this is how they always act. They don't need to threaten because they already know their strength. Maybe waiting calmly is more powerful than firing weapons. The officers in the room paused. The comment was unexpected, but it carried weight. Perhaps the human's patience was a lesson in itself, a lesson the Empire had never considered. Meanwhile, scientists and strategists worked tirelessly to understand the fleet. Every detail of the ships was examined. The energy readings, the shape of the hulls, the way they moved as a single entity. Nothing suggested recklessness or improvisation. Every movement was calculated, every formation precise. The humans were not merely advanced, they were disciplined, organized, and capable of strategic foresight far beyond what the Empire had encountered in other species. Across the Empire, citizens were growing increasingly aware of the humans. Screens in public areas, schools, and even private homes displayed the distant fleet. People speculated endlessly about who these newcomers were and what they wanted. Children asked teachers and parents, "Are they dangerous?" And the adults often responded cautiously, sometimes unsure themselves. Yet there was also fascination. For many, it was the first time a species had arrived with such calm presence, challenging the assumptions of the Empire without any aggression. On the space stations, officers who had once prided themselves on their knowledge and experience began to feel a sense of humility. The humans were teaching a lesson without words. Power could be quiet, strength could be patient, and confidence did not need to be loud or threatening. The first official meeting between the humans and the Empire's representatives was scheduled carefully. Protocols were followed meticulously, and every precaution was taken. The Empire wanted to ensure that if the humans had hostile intentions, they would not be caught unprepared. Yet, as the representatives approached the fleet, they realized that the humans did not act defensively or aggressively. They maintained the same calm, precise formation, showing no fear, no panic, and no threat. The human message requesting peaceful contact had already shifted the mood within the Empire. What began as caution was slowly turning into curiosity. Could this species truly be as confident as they appeared? Could they wield such strength while remaining patient and measured? Questions like these filled every discussion, every meeting, and every report. During the first direct communication, the human representative spoke in a tone that was calm, respectful, and steady. They explained the purpose of their arrival simply: to establish contact, to understand the Empire, and to offer cooperation. There was no boast, no attempt to intimidate, and no hidden agenda. Every word carried clarity and honesty. The Empire's leaders were taken aback. For centuries, they had relied on displays of power to establish respect and authority. Yet these humans commanded attention without any display at all. They didn't need to fire a weapon or deploy fleets aggressively. Their presence, their calm, and their discipline did all the work. As discussions continued, the Empire realized that the humans had something far more valuable than just technology. They had patience, foresight, and a deep understanding of strategy, not the kind measured in weapons or fleets, but in actions, timing, and observation. They could wait, assess, and choose their moments carefully, a skill the Empire had rarely seen in any species before. The impact of this realization was profound. Officers began to reconsider their approach to diplomacy. Citizens began to discuss possibilities beyond war and conquest. Even the most experienced commanders began to see that there was more to strength than sheer firepower. The humans, by simply waiting and speaking respectfully, had started to change the Empire from within. As the first contact progressed, a pattern emerged. Humans asked questions before giving answers. They observed before acting. They listened carefully, and their responses were measured, never rushed. Even when discussing challenging topics, they remained composed, demonstrating an understanding of consequences that impressed imperial officials. The Empire began to understand that this species valued cooperation, knowledge, and respect. Their fleet was not just a show of power. It was a statement about who they were as a civilization. They had arrived prepared, disciplined, and confident, yet without the arrogance or aggression the Empire had come to expect from advanced species. Through all of this, a sense of admiration began to develop. Citizens, officers, and leaders alike found themselves inspired by the humans' approach. They were not invaders. They were not conquerors. They were, in the simplest terms, disciplined explorers, arriving with patience, clarity, and purpose. By the end of Part 3, the Empire had started to see a new path forward. Fear and caution were still present, but they were tempered by respect, curiosity, and a desire to understand. The humans had arrived, made their intentions clear, and forced the Empire to reconsider everything they thought they knew about strength, strategy, and diplomacy. And as the human fleet continued to hover calmly at the edge of space, the galaxy began to realize that this encounter was not just the beginning of contact. It was the start of a lesson in patience, respect, and the quiet power of presence. For the first time in decades, the Empire understood that not all power needed to shout. Sometimes the calmest presence could speak the loudest, and sometimes the most disciplined patience could be the most formidable force of all. The stage was set for a future none of them could fully predict. And the Empire, frozen in awe and curiosity, waited to see what the humans would do next. The days following the first message from the humans were unlike any the Empire had experienced in decades. Officers, diplomats, and scientists alike were caught in a mixture of curiosity, uncertainty, and awe. The human fleet remained at the edge of imperial space, silent yet commanding attention, as if simply existing in that formation was enough to shift the mood of everyone observing it. Inside the main command station, discussions took on a different tone. Before, officers had spoken in terms of defense, strategy, and potential threats. Now, their words included questions that had no easy answers. What drives these humans? How do they maintain such discipline without any apparent fear or aggression? Why have they chosen to arrive quietly rather than aggressively? A group of young cadets watched the fleet from the observation deck. Their eyes followed the sleek ships as they adjusted slightly in formation, never too close, never too distant, always maintaining an unspoken balance. One cadet whispered to another, "They are not just ships. It's like they are alive, like they are thinking together." Her companion nodded, feeling the same strange mix of respect and curiosity. The humans were teaching a lesson without words, a lesson in calm, confidence, and observation. On the council floor, debates continued over how to engage with this new species. Some members argued that the humans were hiding their true capabilities, and that the Empire should prepare for aggression at any moment. Others argued that their calm, patient presence indicated a level of intelligence and morality that demanded respect rather than fear. It was a delicate balance. The humans had brought a fleet large enough to intimidate, but they had not used it to threaten anyone. That alone was a challenge the Empire had never faced. The first human emissaries were finally ready to communicate in more detail. Their representatives, calm and composed, spoke in measured tones, sharing only what was necessary, asking thoughtful questions, and showing genuine interest in the Empire's culture, history, and way of life. They did not boast about their technology or fleet size. They did not make demands. They simply observed and spoke with quiet confidence. Imperial officers found themselves fascinated. Humans asked questions about the Empire's history that had never been asked before. They inquired about trade, about communication, and about the ways different species interacted across the galaxy. They seemed genuinely interested in learning, not just negotiating or manipulating. This approach was unlike any previous visitors the Empire had encountered. Scientists were especially intrigued. The humans' ships were unlike anything recorded in the Empire's databases. Their energy systems were efficient, their movements precise, and the technology seemed designed not only for strength, but for harmony with the surrounding space. There were no signs of waste or unnecessary force. Everything served a purpose, but nothing suggested aggression. The scientists could not help but marvel at the design, noting that it reflected the humans themselves, disciplined, intelligent, and patient. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens of the Empire followed news about the humans with growing excitement. Stories of the fleet spread across the communication networks. Children sketched images of the sleek ships, imagining the beings inside. Teachers discussed the arrival in classrooms, using it as a chance to talk about patience, strategy, and morality. Everywhere, people were talking about the humans not as a threat, but as an example of a new way of thinking. Even military officers began to change their perspective. Where once they had relied solely on intimidation and firepower to maintain respect, they now saw a different form of strength in the humans. Strength that did not need to be loud. Strength that did not need to attack to prove its point. They began to understand that patience and observation could be more powerful than any fleet of weapons. A small team of diplomats was assigned to meet the human emissaries. The meeting was carefully arranged, with attention to every detail of protocol. Imperial representatives were nervous, knowing that any mistake could be interpreted as hostility. Yet when the humans arrived, they remained calm, polite, and respectful. Their presence alone communicated confidence. They did not demand recognition, but they did not shrink either. They existed fully in the moment, as if to say, "We are here, and we mean no harm." The conversations that followed were slow and deliberate. Humans asked about the Empire's traditions, its laws, and its values. They asked what the Empire hoped to achieve by expanding across the galaxy and how different worlds were integrated into the larger system. In every question, there was a tone of curiosity and a desire to understand rather than judge. Imperial diplomats were surprised. They had expected negotiation tactics, attempts at manipulation, or even veiled threats. Instead, they found themselves engaged in genuine conversation, one that required listening, patience, and thoughtful responses. Humans had arrived not to dominate, but to connect. This approach was beginning to influence those who observed it. Junior officers discussed it among themselves, saying things like, "They don't need to attack. They are teaching us to think differently." Teachers incorporated the human approach into lessons about strategy, patience, and leadership. Citizens debated openly whether the humans' calm and respectfulness was actually a form of power that the Empire had never understood before. Even the Empire's leaders were affected. They realized that their previous assumptions about strength and power might be incomplete. The humans had shown that confidence did not need to be loud, that respect could be earned without intimidation, and that intelligence could be demonstrated through observation and patience rather than force. This was a lesson that had never been so clearly demonstrated in the history of the Empire. As the meetings continued, humans demonstrated another remarkable quality: adaptability. They listened carefully to the Empire's explanations, adjusted their own responses, and asked follow-up questions that were insightful without being confrontational. Their understanding of context, subtlety, and timing was unlike anything the Empire had seen. They seemed to understand not only the technical aspects of diplomacy, but also the human, or rather, sentient elements of interaction. A young officer, observing one of the meetings, whispered to a colleague, "They don't just observe. They teach without saying it. Every action, every pause, every question. It shows how to act with control." The colleague nodded, realizing that the humans were demonstrating not only intelligence, but wisdom, patience, and a level of emotional understanding rarely seen in any advanced species. The citizens of the Empire were watching all of this unfold. Reports and broadcasts emphasized the calm and respectful approach of the humans. Across thousands of worlds, people discussed the arrival and debated the implications. Some feared that such patience and restraint might hide power they could not yet see, but many others admired the humans' approach. It was rare in the galaxy to encounter a species that could command respect simply by existing, without aggression, without boasting, and without manipulation. On the command stations, scientists continued to analyze the humans' fleet. They found subtle patterns that suggested efficiency, coordination, and strategic foresight. The ships were designed to operate in unison, yet each had its own purpose. Energy was distributed carefully, systems were balanced perfectly, and movements were precise. It was clear that the humans had a philosophy behind their technology, one that combined strength with restraint. As Part 4 drew to a close, the Empire had begun to shift in ways that no one could have predicted. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by curiosity and respect. Observation had become understanding, and understanding was beginning to shape the Empire's response. The humans had arrived not as conquerors, not as aggressors, but as disciplined, patient explorers seeking connection. The lesson of the humans was clear. True strength is not measured by force alone. Confidence can be expressed without intimidation. Discipline and patience can challenge assumptions more than any weapon. And sometimes, the mere presence of a thoughtful, intelligent species can inspire reflection, change, and growth in those who observe it. The human fleet remained at the edge of space, silent yet commanding, waiting for the next steps, while the Empire slowly began to realize that this encounter was not just about diplomacy. It was about learning, understanding, and perhaps even growing. And in that realization, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for what would come next. The calm patience of the humans had already unsettled many in the Empire, but nothing prepared the leaders and officers for what happened next. After weeks of careful observation, analysis, and cautious communication, the humans did something unexpected. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but the effect was profound. The Empire had been running simulations, predicting the humans' potential moves. Every scenario they considered involved either negotiation or conflict. Some assumed the humans would finally display force if provoked. Others hoped for a breakthrough in diplomacy. Yet no simulation could capture what happened that morning. It began with a routine meeting. Human representatives were seated across from Imperial officials in the main conference hall. The room was tense but calm. Everyone expected careful conversation, perhaps questions or explanations about Earth and their purpose. But then, a senior Imperial commander, perhaps testing the humans, asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. What if we deny you access to our systems? What if we refuse to allow contact? What then? A quiet silence fell over the room. The humans did not flinch. They did not react with surprise or anger. Instead, the lead human representative leaned slightly forward and spoke, their voice calm, composed, and steady. We will understand. We only wish for cooperation, not force. If you choose denial, we will wait. If you choose to speak, we will listen. Our purpose is to connect, not to impose. The room froze. The Empire's officials had expected negotiation, diplomacy, perhaps even veiled threats. Instead, they were met with calm confidence, a patience that did not beg, but did not bend either. The simplicity and clarity of the statement carried weight far beyond any fleet maneuver or energy reading. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the most hardened military commanders were silent, absorbing the meaning behind the words. Here was a species capable of immense power, yet they did not use it to intimidate. They had brought a fleet large enough to make anyone pause, yet they relied entirely on words, patience, and presence. That alone was astonishing. The impact of this moment spread quickly. Across the Empire, officers, analysts, and citizens alike discussed the encounter. Conversations were filled with awe and curiosity. People debated what it meant to be powerful, whether strength always had to be shown through aggression, and how the humans could hold such confidence without force. Children drew pictures of the calm human ships, imagining beings who were strong yet patient. Teachers used the story as a lesson in restraint and strategy. The entire society seemed to pause, reflecting on a species that acted differently from anything they had ever known. Back in the conference hall, the humans continued to demonstrate subtle intelligence. They asked questions about the Empire's priorities, about the ways decisions were made, and about how citizens viewed the Empire's power. Each question was carefully chosen, measured, and insightful. Imperial officials realized that the humans were not only intelligent, but emotionally aware. They understood context, timing, and subtlety in ways that few species could match. The demonstration of patience had a ripple effect across the Empire. Senior leaders began to reconsider their assumptions about power. Perhaps strength did not always have to be shown through weapons or intimidation. Perhaps true confidence lay in knowing one could act, but choosing not to, in demonstrating discipline rather than dominance. The humans' approach was teaching a lesson the Empire had never learned before. That calm observation, respectful communication, and patience could change the perception of power far more effectively than force. Even among the junior officers, the effect was profound. Cadets who had been trained to respond quickly, to assert authority, and to act decisively found themselves observing, learning, and reflecting. One young officer whispered to a friend, "They don't just have power. They know how to use it wisely. They are teaching us what real control is." The friend nodded, staring at the images of the human fleet projected on the large view screens. Realizing that the lesson extended far beyond tactics, it was about character, patience, and judgment. Scientists continued to study the human fleet, marveling at the subtle ways the ships operated. Every movement was deliberate, balanced, and precise. Energy usage was optimized for efficiency rather than display. Coordination between vessels was seamless, as though guided by a collective understanding rather than orders alone. It was more than technology. It was a reflection of the civilization itself. Humans were disciplined, organized, and capable of foresight in ways that the Empire had never encountered. The citizens of the Empire began to tell stories about the humans. Across towns, cities, and space stations, people discussed the calm, confident approach of the fleet. Artists created depictions of the human ships, emphasizing their elegance, precision, and quiet power. Scholars wrote about the diplomacy they observed, analyzing the lessons of restraint, patience, and moral confidence. Everywhere, humans became symbols of a different kind of strength, one that relied not on fear, but on respect earned through discipline and integrity. The first few weeks of direct communication revealed another remarkable trait. The humans did not rush responses. They carefully considered each question, listened attentively, and only spoke when it was necessary. Their timing, tone, and words were measured. There was no rush, no urgency, no need to impress with speed or quantity of information. Every answer carried clarity, thoughtfulness, and honesty. This approach forced the Empire's officials to slow down, listen carefully, and think critically about their own words and actions. One imperial commander, observing a meeting, muttered quietly to a colleague, "It's like they are teaching us something without saying it outright." Every pause, every thoughtful answer, it shows control. They don't need to attack to demonstrate their strength. They simply exist with purpose. The humans' presence continued to influence the Empire in unexpected ways. Junior officers began adjusting their own approach to communication and leadership. Diplomats became more reflective, considering context and consequences in greater depth. Even citizens began to embrace the idea that patience, observation, and respect could achieve results that force alone could not. The humans were not just visitors, they were teachers, demonstrating an entirely new philosophy of interaction. As the meetings progressed, the humans asked questions about the Empire's history, politics, and culture. They were curious, not judgmental. They sought to understand, not manipulate. In every interaction, they displayed a combination of intelligence, empathy, and discipline that left imperial officials increasingly aware of the gap between appearances and reality. By the end of Part 5, the Empire had experienced a profound shift. What began as cautious observation had turned into admiration, reflection, and even self-questioning. The humans had arrived not as conquerors, not as aggressive negotiators, but as patient, disciplined, and morally confident beings. The moment in the conference hall, when the human representative calmly stated that they would respect denial and only sought cooperation, became legendary within the Empire. Officers, diplomats, and citizens alike repeated the words, "We will understand. We only wish for cooperation, not force." The phrase was discussed, analyzed, and shared widely. It had power far beyond its simplicity, illustrating a concept the Empire had rarely witnessed. Restraint is its own form of strength. The human fleet remained stationed quietly at the border, unassuming yet commanding attention. Their presence was a challenge not through action, but through example. The Empire had to reconsider everything it thought it knew about power, control, and influence. And as the galaxy paused, watching the slow unfolding of these interactions, it became clear that the humans were not just visitors. They were a force of change. Through patience, wisdom, and quiet confidence, they were reshaping perceptions, challenging assumptions, and teaching the Empire a lesson that would be remembered for generations. The stage was set for the final phase of this encounter. The Empire had learned to respect, to pause, and to observe. The humans had shown their philosophy through action, demonstrating that strength could be silent, patience could be powerful, and presence could teach without a word. And in that quiet, patient, and disciplined presence, the Empire realized the truth. The humans had arrived not to dominate, but to inspire, not to conquer, but to show that power and wisdom could coexist in ways no one had ever imagined. The weeks of observation, analysis, and cautious interaction had changed the Empire in ways no one had fully anticipated. Officers, diplomats, and citizens had begun to see the humans not as a threat, but as a lesson in restraint, discipline, and thoughtful power. Every moment the fleet hovered at the edge of imperial space reminded the galaxy that strength could exist without aggression, and influence could be exercised without intimidation. The final meeting between the humans and the Empire's council was arranged with utmost care. Every detail was considered: protocols, timing, communication channels, and security measures. The council had debated endlessly, weighing the risks and benefits of engagement. Yet, as the human representatives entered the virtual conference, their calm presence immediately put tension to rest. They did not radiate arrogance or entitlement. They were confident, steady, and composed. The council leaders were nervous. They had never faced a species that demanded respect not through force, but simply through the dignity of its presence and the patience of its actions. Every word spoken by the humans carried thoughtfulness, and their questions reflected curiosity rather than challenge. It was as if they understood not just the technicalities of diplomacy, but the deeper essence of dialogue, understanding, reflection, and cooperation. For hours, the conversation unfolded. The humans asked about the Empire's values, its goals, and the ways it maintained peace across countless worlds. They shared information about Earth, its history, and the way humans approach challenges and progress. There was no boast, no attempt to impress, only clarity and honesty. Imperial leaders listened carefully, taking in every word. Aware that this was a lesson in more than strategy, it was a lesson in wisdom, patience, and perspective. Citizens across the Empire followed the broadcast with fascination. For months, the humans had been a symbol of mystery, discipline, and subtle power. Now, they were a symbol of possibility. Across thousands of worlds, children drew the ships in perfect formation, imagining beings who could hold immense power yet choose to act only with purpose. Schools discussed the humans' approach as a lesson in ethics, communication, and self-control. The simple idea that strength could be shown without aggression began to influence everyday conversations. From family dinners to scholarly debates. In the council chamber, a senior official addressed the assembly. "We have studied their fleet, their words, and their actions. We have debated endlessly, yet the answer is clearer now than ever. They are not here to threaten us. They are here to connect. They are here to share understanding, not to impose control. Their approach challenges us to reconsider how we view power, influence, and cooperation." The human representative responded with a calm nod, then spoke. "Our intention has never been to dominate or coerce. We have arrived with patience, with respect, and with the hope that we may learn and grow together. The choice to engage rests entirely with you. We wait, not as a threat, but as partners who seek understanding." The words, simple yet profound, resonated throughout the council. For the first time in centuries, The empire was not making a decision based on fear, aggression, or defense. They were making a decision based on respect, curiosity, and the recognition that the humans had already taught them an invaluable lesson, that true strength includes patience, humility, and clarity of purpose. After careful discussion, the council reached a historic decision. They would allow the humans to enter a formal partnership, establishing dialogue, collaboration, and shared exploration. It was a choice not born from coercion or intimidation, but from genuine respect for a species that had demonstrated discipline, intelligence, and moral confidence. The announcement spread across the galaxy, reaching billions of citizens who had been following the arrival with awe. When the human fleet slowly moved forward, leaving the edge of Imperial space, the citizens and officers watched in silent admiration. Each ship maintained perfect formation, moving with purpose, yet without haste or arrogance. The humans had shown that arrival need not be loud to be significant. Their patience had commanded respect more effectively than any weapon could. The Empire's leaders reflected on the months of observation. They had witnessed a species capable of immense power, yet entirely disciplined, respectful, and patient. They had seen beings who could have intimidated, coerced, or conquered, yet chose only to connect. And through these actions, the humans had quietly reshaped the Empire's understanding of strength, power, and diplomacy. In public squares and homes, citizens discussed the lessons learned. Families spoke about patience and careful listening. Scholars wrote essays on the human approach to strategy and interaction. Even military officers reconsidered their tactics, understanding that restraint and observation could be just as powerful as weapons and force. The humans' philosophy had begun to influence not just policy, but thought, behavior, and culture. Inside the fleet itself, the humans were calm and observant. They maintained their usual precision, never rushing, never imposing, and always ready to respond thoughtfully to the Empire's queries. Their actions reflected a civilization that valued understanding over dominance, patience over haste, and cooperation over conflict. They were, in every sense, explorers with wisdom beyond mere technology. For the Empire, the encounter had been transformative. They had arrived expecting either negotiation or conflict, yet they were met with patience, intelligence, and moral clarity. They realized that power could be silent, influence could be subtle, and leadership could be demonstrated through calm presence rather than force. The humans had arrived not only as visitors, but as teachers. As the final agreements were formalized, the humans' presence became permanent in the minds of those who had observed them. The Empire had learned lessons that would endure. Strength could exist without aggression. Wisdom could guide action without force, and patience could reshape perceptions in ways weapons never could. The galaxy itself seemed to pause, recognizing that a new chapter had begun. Citizens watched as the human fleet entered Imperial space in careful formation, yet without urgency. Screens broadcast the scene across thousands of worlds. People whispered, "They are not here to conquer. They are here to teach." Children drew the ships, imagining beings who could hold power without using it, who could act without rushing, and who could inspire without demanding. Even military commanders reflected on the humans' approach. They realized that strategy was more than positioning fleets or preparing weapons. Strategy included patience, observation, and the ability to understand opponents and allies without aggression. The humans had demonstrated that wisdom and discipline could be more powerful than intimidation, and that moral confidence could be a force in itself. By the end of this historic encounter, the Empire had changed. What began as fear and uncertainty had transformed into respect, curiosity, and admiration. The humans had not forced entry, nor had they displayed power aggressively. Instead, they had arrived calmly, thoughtfully and patiently, and through that very patience, they had reshaped the Empire's understanding of power diplomacy, and cooperation. The human fleet, now integrated into imperial space under careful observation and collaboration, remained disciplined and precise. Every ship, every movement, and every interaction reinforced the lesson. Strength is not measured solely in weapons or fleets, but in patience, moral clarity, and the willingness to act with purpose rather than haste. The citizens of the Empire, watching the humans and hearing the stories, were inspired. They began to imagine a galaxy where strength was tempered with wisdom, where discipline guided action, and where cooperation could achieve what force alone never could. The humans had arrived as visitors, but they left a legacy that would endure for generations. And so, the Empire froze not in fear, but in awe. They froze not because they lacked power, but because they recognized that humanity had shown them a different kind of strength. The humans had arrived quietly, patiently, and respectfully, yet in doing so, they had taught the galaxy a lesson that would be remembered forever. That true power lies not in domination, but in discipline. That influence is strongest when it is earned, and that the quiet presence of those who act with purpose can reshape the course of history without firing a single shot. From that moment onward, the humans were no longer unknown visitors at the edge of imperial space. They were allies, teachers, and examples of a future where strength and wisdom coexist. And as the Empire looked upon the fleet, it understood something fundamental. The galaxy would never be the same again.